The horse knew something was wrong. That's the only way to explain it. 8-year-old Charlie Murphy wasn't just chasing a runaway stallion across the Montana plains in 1887. He was being led. The horse's name was Thunder, a magnificent black beast, his father's pride and joy. Usually when Thunder broke from the paddock, it was a game, a wild gallop, a toss of his mane, a playful challenge. But not this time. This time there was a purpose in the horse's stride. He'd move 50 yards, then stop, turning his massive head to make sure the little boy in the worn-out boots was still following. His ears were pricked forward, his nostrils flared, tasting something on the wind that Charlie couldn't smell. The wind carried whispers out here, whispers of coyote and buffalo, of coming storms and long-dead secrets. Charlie just figured the horse was being stubborn. "Thunder, come back here, you stubborn beast!" he yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the endless grassland. The sun was getting low, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood red. It was beautiful, but it was also a warning. The prairie wasn't a safe place for a boy to be after dark. He was supposed to be with Mrs. Henderson while his father, a traveling merchant, was away in Copper Creek. If she found out he was gone, let alone this far out, he shuddered to think of the trouble he'd be in. He was just a kid, and the world was a very, very big place. They crested a small hill, the kind that rolled across the land like sleeping giants. And that's when Thunder stopped dead. He didn't just stop, he froze. Every muscle in his powerful body went rigid. His head dropped, his ears swiveling like they were trying to catch a signal from the earth itself. Charlie finally caught up, his chest heaving, his cheeks red from the cold air. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his hand reaching out to touch the horse's quivering flank. Thunder was usually as gentle as a lamb, but something about this stillness, this coiled tension, made Charlie's heart start to pound a nervous rhythm against his ribs. And that's when he heard it. It was faint at first, a tiny thread of sound woven into the sigh of the wind. A bird, maybe? A prairie dog? He stood perfectly still, holding his breath, listening with everything he had. The sound came again, and this time, there was no mistaking it. It was a voice, a child's voice, and it was screaming for help. "Hello?" Charlie called out, his own voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The response was immediate, and much clearer this time, as if his call had given it direction. "Help, please, someone help me, I'm down here." Charlie's blood ran cold. He spun around, his eyes scanning the empty landscape. There was nowhere for a person to be, just grass and rocks, and the long, creeping shadows of dusk. But Thunder knew. The horse nickered softly, a low rumble in his chest, and took 3 deliberate steps forward. He led Charlie toward a jagged cluster of old rocks and thorny brush, a place you'd never look twice at. And there, hidden beneath the overgrowth, was the source of the sound. A dark, gaping mouth in the earth, an old well. The stone around its rim was crumbling, the wooden cover long since rotted away to nothing. It was a perfect trap, waiting patiently in the middle of nowhere. If Thunder hadn't led him right to it, he would have walked right past. He might have even fallen in himself. He crept to the edge, his small hands gripping the cold moss-covered stones, and peered into the blackness. "Hello!" he called down again, his voice echoing in the sudden, terrifying depth. "Yes, yes, I'm here!" a voice cried back, raw with desperation and relief. "I've been here since yesterday. Please, you have to get me out." The boy sounded about his own age, trapped, alone, in the dark, for a whole day. Charlie's stomach twisted into a tight, sick knot. He couldn't see the bottom. The well just swallowed the fading light, a pit of pure shadow. It had to be 30, maybe 40 feet deep, an underground grave. "What's your name?" Charlie shouted, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm Bobby," the voice trembled. "Bobby Walsh. I live in Copper Creek with my uncle. I was exploring and I just fell. The sides are too slick to climb. Please don't leave me." Charlie's mind was a whirlwind. He was just a boy. He had no rope, no ladder, nothing. The only smart thing to do was to run back to town, get the sheriff, get real help. But that was miles away. It would take at least an hour, maybe more, especially now that it was getting dark. And Bobby had already been down there for a day and a night. How much longer could he last? I'm going to get help, Charlie yelled down, making a decision. I'll be back as soon as I can. I promise. No, wait! Bobby's voice cracked, a pure, sharp sound of terror. Don't go! What if you can't find this place again? What if something happens to you? Please don't leave me alone again. Charlie hesitated. The kid had a point. The well was almost invisible. He wasn't sure he could find it again on his own. Thunder had led him here through a twisting, winding path. But what else could he do? He couldn't pull a boy out of a 40-foot well by himself. It was impossible. He had to go. I promise I'll come back, Charlie said, his voice more confident than he felt. I'll bring men with ropes. Just hang on. He turned to leave, but Thunder whinnied, a sharp, angry sound. The horse tossed his head and stepped between Charlie and the path back to town, as if blocking his way. It was the strangest thing. The horse that had led him here now seemed desperate for him to stay. I know, Thunder, I know, Charlie said, patting the horse's thick neck. We found him. Now we have to save him. He scrambled onto the stallion's back, a skill his father had taught him, but usually forbade him from doing alone. But this was an emergency. The horse seemed to understand. He didn't fight it. He just turned and started moving at a brisk trot toward the distant, flickering lights of Copper Creek. As they rode, Charlie couldn't stop thinking about the boy in the well. How did he fall? Why was he so far from home? And if he'd been missing for a whole day, why hadn't anyone come looking for him? The questions swirled in his head, each one more unsettling than the last. The air grew colder, biting at his exposed skin. He urged Thunder on, faster and faster, every minute feeling like an eternity. For Bobby, trapped in the cold and the dark, it probably was. After what felt like a lifetime, the first buildings of Copper Creek came into view. It wasn't much of a town, just a handful of wooden structures huddled together against the vast emptiness of the frontier. As they neared the edge of town, Charlie saw a man walking along the road, heading away from the settlement. He was a big man, tall and broad, with a weathered face that looked like it had been carved from old leather. Charlie recognized him. It was Mr. Patterson, a local rancher. He had a reputation for being gruff, a little mean even, but he was also known as a man who could handle himself, a man who could handle anything. He was the perfect person to help. Mr. Patterson! Mr. Patterson! Charlie yelled, kicking Thunder into a canter. The big man stopped and turned, squinting against the last rays of the dying sun. His expression was one of annoyance, but it softened slightly when he recognized the boy. Charlie Murphy? What in tarnation are you doing out here all by yourself, boy? Your pa will have your hide. Charlie practically fell off Thunder, his words spilling out in a panicked rush. Sir, you have to help me. There's a boy. He's trapped in an old well. He's been down there since yesterday and I can't get him out. Patterson's weathered face became a mask of stone. All the gruffness was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp intensity. Whoa, slow down, son. Take a breath. Now tell me everything, from the beginning. Charlie did, explaining how Thunder had led him to the hidden well, about the voice from the darkness. His name is Bobby Walsh, Charlie finished, his chest still heaving. He says he lives in town with his uncle. Do you know him? And that's when it happened. A change. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. The moment Charlie said the name Bobby Walsh, something in Patterson's eyes flickered. His jaw tightened, just for a second. His big, calloused hands curled into fists at his sides. He looked away from Charlie, out toward the darkening plains where the well was hidden, and a look crossed his face that Charlie couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't concern, it wasn't pity, it was something else, something colder. For a long moment, Patterson was completely silent. The only sound was the wind and the jingle of his horse's harness. When he finally looked back at Charlie, his eyes were different. They were hard, like chips of ice. The sudden warmth he'd shown was gone, replaced by a strange, unsettling calm. Yeah, boy, Patterson said, his voice a low rumble. I know the name. He swung himself up onto his horse with an easy, practiced motion. Show me where this well is. A wave of relief washed over Charlie. Mr. Patterson was going to fix everything. He was a grown-up, strong and capable. He knew what to do. Bobby was going to be safe. He climbed back onto Thunder, pointing the way they had come. "It's this way! We have to hurry!" Patterson just grunted in response and kicked his horse into motion. They rode side by side, two big horses and a small one, racing against the encroaching night. But as they rode, a new feeling began to creep into Charlie's heart, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. The relief was fading, replaced by a growing dread. Something was wrong. It was the way Patterson rode, silent and grim. It was the way he kept looking at Charlie, his eyes narrowed, studying him. And it was the feeling he got when he thought about that flicker of something in the man's eyes when he'd said Bobby's name. It wasn't the look of a man about to rescue a child. It was the look of a man heading toward a problem he thought he'd already solved. "Mr. Patterson," Charlie said, his voice small against the vastness of the prairie. "Do you know Bobby's uncle? The one he lives with?" Patterson didn't answer right away. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw working silently. Finally he spoke, his voice flat and empty. "I know of him." "What about Bobby?" Charlie pressed, unable to shake the feeling of unease. "What's he like?" This time Patterson turned his head and looked directly at Charlie. In the dim, failing light, his face was a landscape of harsh shadows. "Let's just say he's not the kind of boy who should be wandering around where he doesn't belong," he said. The words were simple, but the tone was laced with something dark. A coldness that had no place in a rescue mission. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Before Charlie could ask anything else, they arrived. "It's over there," Charlie said, pointing to the cluster of rocks. The place already felt different, more sinister now that night was falling. He slid off Thunder's back and ran to the edge of the well. "Bobby, we're back! I brought help!" he yelled, his voice filled with a hope he no longer truly felt. The reply from the darkness was immediate, a weak, sobbing sound of pure relief. "Oh, thank God. Please get me out of here. I'm so cold. So thirsty." Patterson dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He walked to the edge of the well, his tall frame blocking out the last of the starlight. He peered down into the blackness, his expression completely unreadable. "Hello down there," Patterson called, his voice a dead, emotionless monotone. "Are you here to help me?" Bobby cried from the depths. "Please, I can't take much more of this." Patterson just stood there, a silent silhouette against the night sky. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just stared down into the hole. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Charlie's heart was hammering against his ribs. This wasn't right. None of this was right. "Mr. Patterson?" Charlie whispered, tugging on the man's sleeve. Shouldn't we get a rope or something?" Patterson turned his head slowly and looked down at Charlie. And what the boy saw in the man's eyes would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. There was no compassion, no concern, no urgency. There was only a cold, hard, calculating void. It was the eye of a snake. "Boy," Patterson said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, but more terrifying than any shout. "I need you to understand something. That child down there, he's not supposed to be rescued." The words didn't make sense. Charlie was sure he'd misheard. The wind must have twisted them, changed their meaning. It was the only explanation that his 8-year-old mind could grasp. He took a step back, shaking his head, a knot of confusion and terror tightening in his chest. "What? What do you mean?" he stammered. From the well, Bobby's voice floated up, thin and desperate. "What's going on up there? Is something wrong? Please, just help me." Patterson ignored the cries. His focus was entirely on Charlie, his gaze pinning the boy in place. The friendly rancher from the road was gone. In his place stood a monster. "I mean," Patterson said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a gravelly, dangerous thing, that boy has been nothing but a plague on this town since he got here. His uncle can't handle him, and he's been stealing from my ranch for months." Charlie's head was spinning. Stealing? Even if he was, this was insane. But he's just a kid, Mr. Patterson. You can't just leave him in a well to die." Patterson let out a laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was a harsh, bitter, ugly sound that scraped the inside of Charlie's ears. It was the sound of a predator enjoying its power. Leave him to die? Patterson chuckled, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Boy, I'm the one who put him down there in the first place. The world tilted. The ground seemed to fall away from beneath Charlie's feet. He stumbled backward, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a gasp. His heart wasn't just pounding now, it was trying to batter its way out of his chest. He could hear the blood roaring in his ears, drowning out the sound of the wind. Thunder, sensing his terror, moved to his side. A warm, solid presence in a world that had suddenly turned into a nightmare. You what? Charlie whispered, the words barely audible. Patterson's cold eyes never left his. I caught the little thief red-handed yesterday morning. Tried to make off with one of my calves. It wasn't the first time either. I'd had enough. A man's got a right to protect his property. So you threw him down a well? Charlie's voice was rising, cracking with a mixture of horror and disbelief that was too big for his small body to contain. I brought him out here to teach him a lesson, Patterson said, his tone chillingly casual, as if he were talking about fencing a pasture. Figured a day or two in the dark without food or water would make him think twice about stealing from his betters. I was going to pull him out tomorrow, but then you and that horse of yours had to stick your noses where they don't belong. From the darkness below, a new sound emerged, sobbing. Bobby wasn't calling for help anymore. He was just crying, broken, terrified sobs that echoed up the stone walls of his prison. Please, Bobby wept, his voice muffled by the stone. I'm sorry. I didn't take a calf. I only took food. Some bread from your kitchen. I was just so hungry. My uncle. He barely feeds me. The truth hit Charlie like a punch to the gut. The full, monstrous horror of it. Bobby wasn't a thief stealing livestock. He was a starving, neglected orphan, stealing a crust of bread to survive. And for that crime, this man, this respected rancher, had decided to become his judge, jury, and executioner, leaving him to die of thirst and fear at the bottom of a 40-foot hole. Tears of rage and terror burned Charlie's eyes. You're a monster, he choked out, his voice trembling. Patterson just shrugged, a casual, dismissive gesture that was more terrifying than any threat. I'm a man who protects what's his, he said calmly. And now I've got a new problem, because you know, and you're not the kind of boy who can keep a secret. The implication hung in the air, heavy and deadly. They were miles from anyone. It was dark. Patterson was a giant of a man, and Charlie was just a little boy. No one would ever know what happened out here. He could make them both disappear. Charlie's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. I won't tell, he said quickly, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. I swear, I'll go back to town and I'll just forget this ever happened. Patterson shook his head slowly, that cruel smile returning to his face. No, boy, I can't risk it. You've seen too much. You've got too much of your father's honesty in you. I can see it in your eyes. You'd run straight to the sheriff the second you got back to town. He took a step toward Charlie, a slow, deliberate, menacing step. In that split second, Charlie made a choice. He wasn't going to run. He couldn't outrun a man on a horse. Instead, he did the last thing Patterson would ever expect. He darted toward the well. Bobby! He screamed down into the darkness. The man up here! He's the one who did this to you. He's trying to hurt me, too. What? Bobby's voice shot back up, laced with fresh terror and confusion. You little fool! Patterson roared, lunging for him. But Charlie was small and quick. He dodged the big man's grasping hands, his mind working faster than it ever had before. He could see the hunting knife on Patterson's belt. He knew this was a fight for his life. Listen to me, Bobby, Charlie yelled down, circling the well, keeping the dark opening between himself and the monstrous man. There are handholds in the wall. I saw them when I looked before. The stones stick out. You have to feel for them. I tried, Bobby cried back. I can't. They're too far apart. You're just making this harder on yourself, boy, Patterson snarled, his face contorted with rage. He was stalking him now, trying to corner him. If you just kept your mouth shut, I might have let you go. No, you wouldn't have, Charlie said, surprised at the sudden steadiness in his own voice. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in his stomach. But something else was there too, a burning, righteous anger. You can't let anyone know what you did. Smart kid, Patterson grunted. Too smart for your own good. He lunged again. This time, instead of dodging, Charlie dropped. He threw himself onto his stomach at the very edge of the well, his arms dangling into the black void. Bobby, grab my hands. Now! I can try, came the frantic reply from below. Patterson let out a bellow of fury and dove, his big hands closing around Charlie's ankles. He was trying to drag him back, away from the well, away from his only chance. But Charlie wriggled forward, his body hanging precariously over the edge. I can almost reach, Bobby shouted. A little more. Charlie kicked backward with his free leg, his boot connecting solidly with Patterson's face. The man grunted in pain, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Charlie slid forward another few inches. And then he felt it, the frantic, desperate grip of another boy's hands closing around his wrists. The combined weight was too much. Charlie felt himself being pulled over the edge, into the abyss. But as he fell, Patterson, in his blind rage to stop him, made a fatal mistake. He had leaned too far forward. His balance was gone. When Charlie's weight suddenly vanished over the lip of the well, it threw the big man completely off kilter. Patterson's eyes went wide with a look of pure, primal terror. His arms windmilled wildly, grabbing at empty air. He let out a strangled, pathetic cry, and then he was gone. He tumbled headfirst into the darkness, a huge, flailing shape that crashed past the two boys clinging to the wall. There was a sickening, final thud from the bottom of the well. And then silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Broken only by the sound of two young boys gasping for breath, their hearts trying to beat their way out of their chests. They were alive. They were hanging on, maybe 15 feet down, their feet and hands having miraculously found purchase on the ancient jutting stones of the well. Below them, in the crushing darkness, lay the man who had tried to kill them. Is he? Bobby whispered, his voice a ghost in the darkness. Charlie, his body trembling with adrenaline, forced himself to look down. He couldn't see much, just a dark, unmoving lump at the very bottom. I think so, he whispered back. He's not moving. The reality of what had just happened washed over them. They were still trapped, but they weren't alone anymore. And the monster was gone. We have to climb, Charlie said, his voice shaking but firm. You were right, the handholds are loose, but they're there. We have to go slow, one at a time. The next hour was an eternity of pain and terror. Their fingers were raw and bleeding, their muscles screaming in protest. Every handhold felt like it would crumble. Every foothold felt like it would slip. But they pushed each other on, whispering words of encouragement in the dark, their shared nightmare forging an unbreakable bond between them. Inch by agonizing inch, they clawed their way toward the sky. When Charlie's scraped fingers finally brushed against the cool, damp grass at the top, a sob of relief escaped his lips. He hauled his exhausted body over the edge and immediately turned, reaching back down to pull Bobby the rest of the way. They collapsed on the ground next to the well, two small, shaking heaps under the vast, star-filled sky. Thunder, who had been pacing nervously the entire time, came over and nudged Charlie's face with his soft nose, a silent, comforting presence. After a long time, Bobby spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Why did he do it? Why did he hate me so much? And so, through his tears, Bobby told him everything. About his parents dying of cholera, about the drunken, cruel uncle who barely fed him, about the gnawing, constant hunger that had driven him to take a loaf of bread from a rich man's kitchen. It wasn't a story of a thief. It was the story of a lonely, starving child trying to survive. Charlie's heart ached with a profound and terrible sadness. He looked at the well, at the dark hole that held the body of a man who would have murdered a child for a piece of bread. We have to go back, Charlie said, his voice heavy. We have to tell them what happened. But as they climbed onto Thunder's strong back, a new fear began to settle in. Who would believe them? Patterson was a wealthy rancher, a respected man. They were just two little boys. One the son of a traveling merchant, the other a poor orphan with a reputation for petty theft. It was their word against a dead man's. They thought the nightmare was over. They thought they had found a brutal, frontier kind of justice at the bottom of that well. They were wrong. The nightmare had only just begun. It was going to sleep for 15 years, but it wasn't dead. It was just waiting. 15 years later, the world had changed. The year was 1902. Copper Creek was no longer a dusty outpost. It had electric lights on Main Street, a real train depot, and 1,000 souls who called it home. The wild frontier was being tamed, or so it seemed. Charlie Murphy was a man now, 23 years old. The lanky boy had grown into a tall, broad-shouldered cattle rancher. He was successful, respected, and known for his quiet kindness. The memory of that night was always there, a shadow in the back of his mind. But he had built a good life for himself. Bobby Walsh, who now went by Robert, had done the same. He'd thrown himself into books, clawing his way out of poverty and ignorance to become the town's beloved schoolteacher. The scared, hungry orphan was gone, replaced by a thoughtful, educated man. They were still the best of friends, their bond forged in darkness and sealed in a secret that no one else in the world knew. They never spoke of that day. They didn't have to. It was a ghost that walked beside them, a constant reminder of how quickly a life can change and how close to death they had come. On a crisp October morning, Charlie rode into town for supplies. He saw Robert leaving the schoolhouse and waved him over. "Coffee?" Robert asked, smiling, nodding toward the new cafe that had just opened. As they walked across the street, laughing about some local gossip, neither of them noticed the man watching them from the shadows of an alleyway. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a shock of graying hair and clothes that were worn but clean. He leaned heavily on a gnarled wooden cane, and when he walked, it was with a pronounced, dragging limp. His eyes, however, were sharp and clear, and they were filled with a burning, patient hatred as they followed Charlie and Robert into the cafe. You see, a fall like that, 40 feet onto hard-packed earth, should have killed a man, and it very nearly did. Patterson had woken up days later, broken and bleeding, at the bottom of the well. His leg was shattered, his ribs were cracked, and his head was a symphony of pain. But he was alive. The well had collected enough rainwater for him to drink, and his sheer, stubborn rage had refused to let him die. It took him a week, an entire week of unimaginable agony, to drag his broken body up the same walls the boys had climbed. By the time he clawed his way out, he was more animal than man. He'd heard the news from a passing traveler. The boys had told their story. His ranch had been searched. They'd found evidence of Bobby's neglectful uncle, and the town, hungry for a simple story, had pieced together a narrative of a tragic accident. Patterson, they concluded, must have chased the boy out to the well, and in the dark had fallen in himself. He was presumed dead. Faced with disgrace and possible jail time, he had let them believe it. He'd vanished, taking a new name, a new life, and nursing a singular, all-consuming desire for 15 long years. Revenge. And now he was back to collect. Inside the cafe, the smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air. Charlie and Robert sat at a small table by the window, talking about the future, about expanding the school, about the price of cattle. They were two men who had survived the unthinkable and had carved out a piece of the American dream for themselves. They felt safe. They were wrong. A shadow fell over their table. "Excuse me," a gravelly voice said behind them. They both turned, and the world stopped. Standing there, leaning on his cane, was a face from a nightmare they had long tried to bury. He was older, scarred, his body twisted by the fall that should have killed him. But there was no mistaking those eyes, those cold, dead snake eyes. It was Patterson. Charlie's blood turned to ice water in his veins. Robert's face went white as a sheet, his coffee cup rattling in his trembling hand. It was impossible. It couldn't be him, but it was. Patterson's lips pulled back into a grotesque smile, a parody of warmth. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," he rasped. Instinct took over. Charlie's hand dropped to the butt of the pistol he wore on his hip. But Patterson was a step ahead of him. He had been planning this for 15 years. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said softly, his eyes flicking around the crowded cafe. "Not in front of all these nice people. The mothers, the children. It would be such a mess." The threat was clear. Any move they made would endanger everyone in the room. They were trapped. "How?" was all Robert could manage to whisper, his voice stolen by shock. "How did I survive?" Patterson's laugh was a dry, rattling sound, like stones in a tin can. "It wasn't easy, boys. Not by a long shot. But I had a lot of time to think, lying in that darkness. 15 years of thinking. About you, and about what I was going to do when I finally saw you again." Charlie found his voice, a low, dangerous growl. "Everyone in this town thinks you're dead. You try anything, and you'll be swinging from a rope by sunset." "Oh, I'm not going to try anything," Patterson said, his smile widening. "Not here. Too public. No, you two are going to come with me. We're going to take a little trip, back to where it all started." "And if we refuse?" Robert asked, his voice shaking. Patterson leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that only they could hear. "Then I start talking. I start telling people my side of the story, about how two vicious little boys lured a kind, unsuspecting rancher out to an old well. How they pushed him in and left him for dead. How they've been living a lie for 15 years. You think your reputations will survive that? The successful rancher? The beloved school teacher? I will burn your lives to the ground." The blackmail was perfect. It wasn't about proof. It was about scandal. He would ruin them, destroy everything they had built, whether anyone believed him or not. He would turn their dream into another nightmare. "You have 1 hour," Patterson hissed. "Meet me on the old Miller Farm Road, 2 miles east of town. Come alone, and come unarmed. If you're late, or if I see so much as the town dog following you, I start talking." With that, he turned and limped out of the cafe, the tap, tap, tap of his cane on the wooden floorboards sounding like a death knell. He left them sitting there, two ghosts from the past, their coffee cold, their futures suddenly uncertain. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just been waiting to rise again. "What do we do?" Robert whispered, his face ashen. Charlie's jaw was set like granite. His eyes were hard, the kindness replaced by a cold, grim determination he hadn't felt in 15 years. "We finish this," he said, "once and for all." 1 hour later, they rode out to the meeting place. They were unarmed, just as he'd said. Patterson was waiting for them, mounted on a strong horse, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He didn't say a word. He just gestured with the barrel of the gun for them to follow. The ride to the well was a silent, grim procession. The land was more overgrown now, wilder, but Patterson navigated it with an unnerving certainty. He knew this path. He had probably walked it 1,000 times in his mind. When they arrived, the place was just as Charlie remembered, a scar on the face of the earth. But there was one difference. A new sturdy wooden cover had been built over the opening, complete with a heavy-duty pulley system and a thick coil of rope. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment plan. This was a carefully constructed trap. "Impressive, isn't it?" Patterson said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "I've been preparing for this day for a very long time." "What do you want from us, Patterson?" Charlie demanded, his voice flat. "Justice," Patterson spat, the word sounding like a curse on his lips. "You stole 15 years of my life, my name, my home, everything. Now it's time to pay." "You tried to murder a child for a piece of bread," Robert yelled, his fear finally giving way to a surge of righteous anger. "I was teaching a thief a lesson," Patterson roared back, his face turning purple with rage. "A lesson he deserved. But you two, you had to play hero, and now you're going to find out what it really feels like." He dismounted, the rifle never wavering from their chests. He threw the heavy wooden cover off the well, revealing the familiar black maw beneath. The air that rose from it was cold and damp, smelling of earth and old bad memories. "One at a time," he ordered, gesturing with the rifle. "Down the rope, or I'll just shoot you both right here and throw your bodies in." There was no choice. They were unarmed, outmaneuvered. He had thought of everything. One by one, he forced them down into the stone prison that had haunted their dreams for a decade and a half. As Robert disappeared into the darkness, followed by Charlie, Patterson's triumphant laughter echoed down from above. "Now you know how it feels," he screamed, his voice cracking with insane glee. 15 years I waited. 15 years I dreamed of this. You're going to sit down there in the dark, and you're going to rot just like I should have." The wooden cover slammed shut above them, plunging them into absolute suffocating darkness. They were boys again, trapped and helpless. The handholds were still there, but it didn't matter. Patterson was up there, with a rifle and 15 years of hate. There was no escape. The silence in the well was absolute. For a long time, neither man spoke. They were back in the place where their childhoods had ended. The air was thick with the ghosts of the past. "He's going to leave us here," Robert said, his voice hollow, defeated. "He's just going to let us die." "No," Charlie said, his voice quiet but steady in the darkness. "He won't. He wants to watch. He wants to enjoy it." They could hear Patterson pacing above them, muttering to himself, savoring his victory. This was the end, trapped by a ghost who had clawed his way back from the grave. But then, in the suffocating blackness, Charlie remembered something. Something his father, the traveling merchant, had taught him long ago. A trick for calling Thunder, his prized stallion, from anywhere on the plains. It was a unique, two-toned whistle, high and sharp, then low and long, a sound that could cut through the wind for miles. He had never had to use it in a real emergency. He'd never had to test how far it could truly carry. He put his fingers to his lips. His hands were shaking, but he took a deep, shuddering breath. He had one chance, one impossible, desperate hope. He whistled. The sound was shrill and piercing in the confines of the well, echoing off the stones. Above them, Patterson's pacing stopped. "What was that?" he snarled. "No one can hear you down there, boy. No one is coming to save you." Charlie ignored him. He whistled again, louder this time, pouring all of his fear, all of his hope, all of his life into that one sound. Miles away on Charlie's ranch, a magnificent black stallion was grazing peacefully in its paddock. The horse was older now, his muzzle graying, but his body was still a fortress of muscle. His name was Thunder. He heard it. His head snapped up, his ears swiveling. It was faint, a ghost of a sound on the wind. But he knew it. It was the call, the emergency call he had not heard since he was a young colt. A call that meant his master was in the worst kind of trouble. He didn't hesitate. With a powerful snort, he lowered his head and shattered the wooden paddock fence into splinters. He was free. He turned his face to the east, toward the old forgotten places, and he began to run. He wasn't just trotting or cantering. He was running with a primal fury, his massive hooves tearing up the earth, a black thunderbolt streaking across the plains. The horse that had started it all was coming to finish it. Above the well, Patterson was dragging heavy rocks toward the opening. He was going to seal them in, a permanent grave. "Time to say your prayers, boys," he cackled, heaving a large stone onto the wooden cover. He was so consumed by his revenge that he didn't hear it at first. A low, rhythmic drumming. A sound that was getting louder, closer. It sounded like a storm rolling in. It sounded like thunder. He paused, frowning, and looked up, and his blood ran cold. Crashing through the brush, its eyes wild, its mane flying, was a demon made of black horseflesh. It was Thunder. The stallion wasn't a young horse anymore. He was a 2,000-pound beast of pure, focused rage. Patterson fumbled for his rifle, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. He had accounted for everything, every possibility. Except this. He never accounted for the horse. He raised the rifle to his shoulder, trying to draw a bead on the charging animal. But he was too slow. Thunder didn't slow down. He didn't shy away. He let out a piercing, furious scream and reared up, his powerful front legs pawing at the sky. For a moment, he was a terrifying silhouette against the setting sun. And then he came down. Patterson didn't even have time to scream. The hooves, hard as stone, struck him with the force of a battering ram. The rifle flew from his hands, discharging uselessly into the sky. The man who had survived a 40-foot fall, who had nursed his hatred for 15 years, was trampled into the dust in a matter of seconds. His perfect revenge, his lifetime of planning, ended under the furious hooves of the very animal that had thwarted him all those years ago. Thunder paced around the well, snorting, his body still trembling with adrenaline. He nudged the heavy wooden cover with his nose, winning down into the darkness. Charlie and Robert could only listen, their hearts pounding as the sounds of the struggle above them gave way to an eerie silence. Then they heard the familiar, beloved whinny of the horse. "He came," Robert whispered in disbelief. "He actually came." The rope was still there, dangling from the pulley. Using the familiar handholds, they climbed out of the well for the last time, emerging into the cool evening air, blinking in the twilight. They were free, truly free. They stood there, two men looking at the still, broken body of their tormentor, and beside him stood the brave, loyal horse who had saved their lives not once, but twice. Thunder nudged Charlie's hand, his breathing finally slowing, his duty done. The secret wasn't a burden anymore. It was a story of survival, of a bond between two boys and a remarkable animal. They buried Patterson out on the plains where no one would ever find him. And with him, they buried the last ghost of their past. They rode home under a canopy of stars, the nightmare finally, truly over. Justice, in the Old West, sometimes comes in strange and unexpected ways. Sometimes it comes on four hooves. If this story gave you chills, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you want more tales of the strange and the mysterious, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what you thought about Thunder's incredible loyalty. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.